Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our program today. Is your assessment prejudice with Roger Stalheim? In a modern marketplace flooded with possible pre-hire and development support assessments, it isn't always clear which assessments will work well for your intended use, much less which ones are valid and safe to use. So some companies may also misuse assessments in ways that multiply bias. Others are scared of the legal liabilities and compliance issues and tend to avoid assessments altogether. So, to help answer some of those concerns, Roger Stalheim will be presenting his program. Now, Roger has owned and operated 4 startup companies and sold all of them profitably. His extensive success consulting with business owners and helping them improve profitability and has partnered with over 100 companies to get better results. Roger is a past certified TAP facilitator and coach, as well as being certified in all of the TTISI's assessments and tools. So, with that, I'd like to introduce you to Roger Stalheim. Roger, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on this session. My purpose in today's session is to suggest ways of conducting a assessment of the DISC and how you can minimize prejudice and create better credibility with your employees and with your clients. It's super important that we learn how to do these as accurate as possible. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today are I'm going to relate some personal stories about how I've used assessments and the fantastic results. I'm also going to talk about some history. I'm absolutely super impressed with the history that goes back and talks about how these were developed and brought into play. And then I want to talk about, finally, some of what my process is and how we get results and how we do the assessment that brings value to everyone who hears. So with that, let's get started. Getting going, I'd like to relate a story, and I think you'll find this story funny. I hope that you'll find it enlightening, and I hope that you'll be entertained by it. So a year ago, last New Year's Day, I was at a party with 11 of my friends, and we were playing board games. And one of the people playing the board games was delaying making a decision. And she started to get some criticism about that delay and some impatience and those things. And I finally spoke up and said, look, this is who she is. And delaying a decision is just simply her natural style. So cut her some slack. She's just playing her personality. And another person spoke up and said, well, it's so annoying. And I said, you're a high D and you find it annoying because you make quicker decisions. You need less information. And that's who you are. And she probably finds your quickness in making decisions and risk taking probably just as annoying as you're finding with her. And she nodded affirmatively, of course, that, yeah, this is who I am. And amazingly enough, the person who made that statement, who is that risk taker, said, yeah, that's who I am too. So what? And so said the next thing that person said to me in the group was, so what do you mean by this is her personality? And I said, well, Denise, who's trying to make the decision, she's a high S, which is that high phlegmatic, and a little bit lower I, which is the sanguine kind of part of the personality. And she has a tendency to rely more on the green, the high S, as you see in the picture, than she does on her yellow. This one that's on the screen is actually Amy's assessment, who is not part of this. So I said, she has a profile very much like a school teacher, high S, high I, or high I, S. And she can be introvert at times, she can be extrovert at times. And she is slower about her process, but she has to think through all the details more thoroughly. And she's more cautious about expressing her personal feelings. This is normal for her. This is just how she functions. You, on the other hand, make faster decisions, quicker pace, and you actually make decisions with much less information. Not saying it's right or wrong, it's who you are. So I asked if that was accurate, and the person said, well, yeah, how did you know all that stuff just sitting here? And I said, well, when you get to know how personalities kind of perform based on their disc, and you actually compare it with other things, it's important. So I want to point out something on this graph. If you notice, where the two graphs are there, there's a black line that goes through, and part of the graph is above the black line, the blue and the yellow, and some of it's below. I want you to notice that that's called a blend. And what's above the line is 4 indicators of a personality, and what's below that black line is another 4. There are actually 8 things to look at, and that's without considering what the blend may look like. The blend may incorporate over 144,400 and some possibilities. So how do we be more accurate about that blend? We'd be more accurate by comparing it with the motivators, by blending that with the motivators, by blending it with the other 6 or 7 graphs in a standard disc, could be up to 19 graphs if you're doing a very high level assessment called the trimetrics. They tell a story. It's our job as trained professionals to tell that story accurately by reading what they are telling us. And that's the topic of today, is by reducing prejudice, by understanding the entire story. So, so what I did with that group was very entertaining, and each one around the table started asking about their personality, which I engaged them on. It was fun. It was entertaining. Everybody laughed. But what's kind of neat about it was everybody learned something about themselves, and they learned something about the other people. Ironically, one of the people spoke up and said, "So Roger, you're reading all this. So what am I thinking?" Imagine, what am I thinking? Has nothing to do with the rest of this. So may I ask, how well do you know the descriptors that are below that black line? And how well do you know those descriptors above? Can you blend those 8 with all of the possibilities where the graphs actually go? Can you actually compare that with the motivators to come up with a better idea of this person and how they function? And can you blend them with the other pages of the report? That's what I do. That's what we as professionals should be doing as we're doing assessment evaluation. So when we're talking about the 8 descriptors in front of you, you see driving, ambitious, inspiring, relaxed, but you'll also see what's below that black line: calculating, cooperative, reflective, mobile, active, restless. They all have meanings, and the colored ones are telling you what they actually clicked on, which tells you what they actually are identifying with. And that's important. Not to say that the rest of them couldn't be a descriptor that's useful for the person, but that's where we asking questions and looking at it comes into play, to look at those. So let's talk about prejudice. It's a preconceived opinion that is based on, not based on data or fact or actual experience. It's subjective to many influences, and some of those influences are how we viewed events in our past. They are learned experience. They are called contextual when we bring them out of our past. Have you given it much thought that we as people, as we grew up, we have a tendency towards a certain way? It's not always accurate, and being able to understand that's important. So there are incorrect and correct information that we receive, and we decide how accurate it is. By revisiting what we believe and why we believe it can be very enlightening, and can be very humbling too. But prejudice happens when we make conclusions when we really aren't sure if it leads to the actual conclusions that we've derived. And we need to be aware of that. Gossiping is a prejudice. Gossiping is both inaccurate information that gets passed on, but according to Webster's dictionary, gossiping is also sharing information that may have been given to us, privileged and kept confidential. But if it gets repeated, even though it's factual, it's still considering gossiping. And I think that's part of where we're at. So other people's personalities compared to our own. I found myself at the very beginning, because I am a high D, high C kind of person. It is that driving, ambitious, accurate, open-minded person, that I had a tendency to look at other people with the same framework that I am. That's prejudice. That's not looking at them for who they are. That's looking at it through my lens. And that's something we need to be aware of. Our emotional state at the time can create prejudice conclusions. So misreading others' decisions and how they arrived at that can be prejudice. And I'm just talking about factors. So one's past can lead to perceptions and lead us down the wrong path. So we have tools that help us sort that out. And one of those tools that I prefer is the TTI personality assessment. If we can bring that up, it's the most accurate. It's the highest ranked, as you notice all the way to the left. They have more assessments than anybody else, the top 12 being TTI Success 24/7. 24/7 is the one we see gets used around here a lot. The DDI, the Hogan, Inner Matrix, we see the predictive index, the Myers-Briggs. So we may have taken those in the past, but I want you to notice the check marks and the X's being they don't offer it. So I think that's exactly why I use their assessment over the others. So I want to tell you a story about how we relate all of these things put together. Our daughter, Amy, we have 2 grandchildren, and those are 2 female grandchildren, one 6 years old and one 8 years old. She was struggling when we were at their house and infighting between the girls. And what I noticed was that she treated them both with the same verbiage, the same tone, which is kind of hard to do. But what I noticed most was that understanding that each of those 2 girls have 2 different types of personalities. And I thought, wonder what it would look like if we could separate that and treat them both according to their personality, not as one. And so I suggested to her that could I make some observations that might help? Of course, Amy rolled her eyes at me, and we all know what that means in body language kind of thing. And I asked for permission. I said, may I relate some things that I see that might be helpful? You take it or leave it. Notice I asked for permission because I noticed that I understand her as a high D, high I, and that works better with them. They accept better. Anyway, Brooklyn, who is the youngest, 6 years old, wears her emotions on her sleeves and is the first to express her emotions. And she demonstrates that. She has many ideas, not saying they're great ideas, but she's always talking about different things she's doing. She's easily distracted and brought into other things. She's kind of a chases shiny objects kind of person. She loves flowing dresses and dancing and being more demonstrative. So I would call that, from definition, a high I or a sanguine personality, or the yellow that we saw in the chart. And they often ask things to be repeated. In the past, many people were misdiagnosed as ADHD because of that. But some of those are misdiagnoses. It's who their personality is, not a flaw. Because there are no right or wrong. And so they honestly do forget. And this annoys my high D daughter, who doesn't accept that and irritates her and makes her angry. Guess which top emotion D has? It's anger. And you'd see that. So the eyes are bottom line oriented, the high yellow. And they love little gifts, and they make decisions based on emotions, not necessarily fact. They may from time to time, depending on the blend. So ask lots of questions because they like to talk, and let them do that. And if you want to motivate them, paint a picture of what you want them to do and what kind of results that affects them personally. And they are very much more agreeable to complying. So how many of you would identify with little Brooklyn? I mean, I admit, I didn't give her a test. I'm just observing. So what about Kennedy, the older one? She's also in the relational category, the high green, and she makes slower decisions. She doesn't like, she makes slower decisions. She likes to finish what she starts. She doesn't like to be interrupted when she starts something. She also, some people call that personality type lazy because of the slowness, but it's not laziness. And a high D might look at it that way. It's really the way she processes information. Kennedy will finish what she starts. You can rely on that. You see the high S with construction workers and fields where they have a process like an IT person or a CPA. And she has just a few friends, whereas Brooklyn loves to make lots of people she just meets their friends. So Kennedy will finish a task. She has trouble starting, holds her emotions on the inside. So we have to be patient with coaxing that out of her. And that's not always easy for a high D person. And don't ask any of them, because they're both relational, what they think. Ask how they feel about it. What's the right term for that personality type? And talk about how they relate to people. Either of them is very thin-skinned and with their personalities. So high Ds have a tendency to talk faster and louder, which is very irritating to especially the high S kind of person. So a few months later, Amy agreed to try some of these things and see how her family went. And a few months later, I talked to Amy and I said, so how's things going at home? And she was bubbly. She said, I cannot believe how much better her household, how much better everybody feels about their inner relationships. And she actually thanked me for giving her some pointers on these things. That's what can happen when you really understand the personalities and want to know how to create relationships, create bridges to people. So is it possible to observe and help people with solutions without a test? Yes, it is. Is it as accurate? No, but it can give you the right direction and help you make things better with relationships. So what are some of the things that help minimize prejudice and bias? Well, first of all, I suggest that you use a high quality assessment, such as the TTI assessment. It has the most research, it is a higher quality, have more assessments types to offer, and there are 12 or 17 of them. TTI is the only assessment company ranked and reveal actually capacities. If you looked at the chart of comparisons and went across on capacities, you would see that they're the only ones who actually provide capacities besides the DDI report. Get certified, get trained on how to read an assessment. It really is the beginning because we have to be constant learners, but it's a great way to start that process. Also, recertify. TTI, as far as I know, is the only one who requires their people to recertify every 2 years. And it sounds kind of overly done, but I always learn something new every time I go through recertification, which I've done 5 times. Beware of your past experience. Beware of how it influences how we think. Some of the things that have occurred in the past, I'm embarrassed to say I misunderstood, whether it was immaturity or for some other reason. And how we feel about something. Our feelings is not a science. It's feelings. It's conclusions made by the minute. But don't dismiss them. Actually, feelings is half of life. But validating those feelings, understanding them as feelings is what's important. And that's something I've had to learn. And I actually got exposed to that through TDI. Beware of your current energy level. That affects your perspective or prejudice, and get to know your client first. I can't emphasize that more, that by understanding your client and where they're coming from and being able to look at how they respond, the words, how they dress, does it match the assessment or have they made some kind of adjustment someplace? And always take opportunities to ask for feedback as you're doing the assessment. Get them to respond, yes, that is more like me, or no, it is not, so that you can tailor it and bring the other graph so that it makes sense. Those are some of the things that I do. I actually, if I'm doing an assessment and I know this person's a high D, I dress more conservatively. If they're high I dress more flashy, even flowered ties to help them feel comfortable. So what about the research? Is it accurate? Can we really depend on the accuracy of the assessments? And I've not forgotten, I promised, to go through the steps of the assessment. So I was astounded at the research and what it actually revealed. The research actually begins back in 1686 with Sir Isaac Newton. And his book, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, led others into the right vein of how to actually evaluate values and information. A man by the G.E. Moore in 1903, in his book, Principia Ethica, brought philosophies into a branch of developing this that made it meaningful to do additional research. And in 1942, Moore was still struggling with the actual definition. It wasn't until 1944 that Dr. Robert Hartman actually brought in the thought concept of the axiom. Comes from the work axios, or value or worthy. Axiom is a value theory. Like mathematics, it's formal axiology and a kind of a logic and a kind of a thinking process, which brought it to a whole new level. And his research actually brought to us not only the DISC, but the Trimetrics HD, which is a very high level science assessment. It's actually at level 4, and also the whole process of doing EQ, emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is very close to an intelligence test. It's a 79, the Trimetrics is a 79-page report. The emotional intelligence helps us be self-awareness, self-regulation, actually motivation, social awareness, and social regulation. Very important pieces that help us understand a person. So let me tell you a little quick story of how I brought all of this into a blending and relationship. I was working with a longtime client, a CPA office, and they were trying to decide on hiring a payroll person. When in the hiring process, I used the Trimetrics HD, which is very revealing. It's a 79-page report. It actually shows you lots, if you use all 19 pieces of it, of defining how a person's going to react and what they're going to do. So I realized time-wise I need to move through this, but so when we did the assessment, we found some people that we'd hired that we weren't looking at the right traits. And so I'd ask to clarification of what are we looking for in this person as far as traits. Once we did that, we were able to, with a surety, this older lady to be one of the top candidates. And so they hired her based upon the Trimetrics report, as well as the interview, as well as her qualifications as far as being able to do payroll. So the owner of the company asked me to really pursue her. So I actually pursued her about 4 times and she wouldn't respond. And so finally I asked the owner again about it. And she said she'll respond this time, which means she's going to talk to her. And responded back to me and said, Roger, I'm a busy person. You got 20 minutes on such and such date. So be here, be ready, and get it done. Kind of like be here, get it done, and get out of here. So I sat down with this lady. She came in kind of like, all right, show me something I don't know, kind of attitude. And it was kind of like, you know, hurry up because I already know everything I should know. You can't possibly show me anything. So I started relating with her and asking questions about her family and the kind of work she did, because that's what a high S wants. If you don't build that relationship, you're not going to get anywhere with this kind of personality. And so as I did that and spent time, I actually spent 15 or 20 minutes doing that. And then as I went through the assessment, she started warming up. She started learning things about herself and learning about her personality and started assuring this lack of self-confidence that who she is as a person. An hour later, I apologized for the time, and she got up and gave me a hug and said, "Thank you for taking time to do this. I really appreciate it." Had nothing to do with the time, had to do with the quality of the relationship. And she was able to go on to be very valuable to the company, of which the owner is was very appreciative of. So I think must be pretty close to the end of my time.
Yeah, Roger, we're just about out of time. We're waiting for like to have some questions. So I'm going to turn this over to Adam. Adam, why don't you go ahead and facilitate the remainder of this webinar? Thank you.
You're on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. I believe, Angela, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
I was hooked by this. I wanted to hear the story. The end of it. So many gems that Roger shared. And yeah, I was, just curious. You have successful startups. You probably didn't employ the use of assessments back then. What difference would have been made, and what biases could you now see, on hindsight? This is probably be a book in itself. I'm not sure we have time to, dive in, but I'm sure you have gems to share on that one.
Yeah, so when I first started with doing coaching, I realized I just wasn't very good at people, understanding people. I ran very successful companies, but how important it is to develop that relationship, which is actually in Maxwell's book, The 5 Levels of Leadership. It's actually level 3, 4, and 5. And becoming a successful leader is about understanding and relating to people as better as you could. I wished I'd have known this stuff. And I actually went after it with a hunger, because I knew how bad I was. And so I dove into it. And even the company that I do coaching for had told me 3 or 4 times, "Roger, nobody cares about that stuff. I care about that stuff." And it's made me a better coach by caring about the details.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that question, Angela. An excellent answer, Roger. Tom, if possible, could you bring up the last slide of the presentation about the conference we have upcoming in March? And while he's doing that, for those of you who are listening to this, if you're interested in hearing more, we're going to have an expanded version of this session talking about how to, eliminate prejudice and bias with the support of scientific tools. On March 8th and 9th, this will actually be our first year, or the inaugural session of our Talent Quest conference. We're also going to have a lot of other sessions about various different uses or combinations of assessments. You can see here that we're going to explore a bunch of different assessments. We're going to look at how to dive into them more deeply, increase our understanding, and how to combine and recombine them in new and useful ways. And this all applies whether you're, starting a small business up to, many thousands of employees. Typically, the larger the organization you're working with, the more multiplicative pressure there is on understanding this information, right? So with that, I think we're a bit over time. I want to thank everybody for showing up. And if you have any questions or you need any help, feel free to reach out to myself, Tom Borg, Ron Altmans, or Roger Stalheim directly if you're interested in hearing more about what he had to say today. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, guys.